if we adopt the position that some of these statements are, I thirst, why have you forsaken me, etc., are not what Jesus said, and no one is saying he spoke them in English, but the best translations of what he said, so they're not changing it, they're changing it, not just translating it, then how do the words not lose their power? And I'll give you an example of this that I've thought about, Mike, is when I discovered in Chariots of Fire that Eric Liddell apparently didn't say, when I run, I feel his pleasure. I was like profoundly disappointed. I was like, no, I quoted him. That has like authority from Eric Liddell. And so it kind of gutted me. And of course, that's not the same kind of authority, but that means something. So how do we preach out of this? How does it mean something? Do you qualify it and go, well, it was maybe made up, but it's still consistent with what Jesus said, as opposed to the way I hear people preaching, like, this is what Jesus said. Like, flesh out for me what that would look like.
Yeah. I think when you're talking about the person in the pew, you don't have to get into all these kinds of details. You gave the example of Chariots of Fire, great movie. Apollo 13, one of my favorites. Gene Kranz, who is played by Ed Harris, makes the famous statement, failure is not an option.
That's right.
But Gene Kranz never made that statement. I met, what was his, I don't remember his first name. I mentioned him in the book, Jesus Contradict. His last name is Grube, Grube. He was Gene's best friend, and he died within, I think, a week after I met with him at his house. And he told me, he said, he asked Gene, he said, I don't remember you even uttering that statement, because he was there at the time during Apollo 13. And Gene, he said, did you at some point utter that statement, failure is not an option? And Gene said, no, but I wished I had. But what had happened was the screenwriters, they took, after interviewing the people there, they took the spirit that these guys had, the attitude that they had, and they only had 2 hours to illustrate, to communicate what it was like with these guys. And the attitude, failure was not an option, was there. It was so crystal clear amongst all of these. And so they put it on the lips of Gene Kranz. So did Gene Kranz utter that? No. But was that attitude the attitude that they all had at Mission Control at that point, or Houston Control? Yes. So I think when you come to the Gospels, they do give us an essentially faithful representation of what occurred. Do they take some liberties in the way they report things? Yes. John more than the others. This is something that Mike Licona did not come up with. This is something that has been around since Origen and others, where they called John a spiritual gospel. They recognized that there was differences. Johannine specialists recognized that there are differences. I look at John and I say, yeah, he's teaching the same thing, but he sure sounds a lot different than he does in the other Gospels. So I'm trying to, how does the pastor communicate this? Again, I don't think that they have to get into details, but maybe if they're giving some kind of classes there for people who are really interested in getting deep into it, they can do it. Let me just conclude this.
Yeah.
There are two principles that I teach my students when we talk about these things. Number one, our view of Scripture should be consistent with what we observe in Scripture. And number two, if we truly want to have a high view of Scripture, then we will accept it as God has given it to us, rather than attempting to force it to fit in a mold of how we think He should have. And if we neglect to do this, we may believe we have a high view of Scripture, but in reality, all we have is a high view of our view of Scripture. And that's just misplaced piety.
Okay, so in many ways, your view is what you call a bottom-up view, starting with an analysis of the text. So you start with that passage in Mark chapter 1. You start with a quote of Zechariah and Jeremiah, come to the conclusion that the authors at times change things. Maybe they got things that seem wrong on the surface, but they had some liberty to invent or change certain sayings, largely faithful to who Jesus was and what he taught. And that could be understood within inerrancy if we understand what the intentions of the writers were. Is that a fair summary of your position? Okay.